So yesterday I was out doing my usual grocery, etc. shopping. It being Saturday morning. And as I'm wheeling my way around the aisles of my favorite shopping temple, Walmart, who do I bump into but my son-in-law? And there he was, cart piled high with items, unlike me, who has a little piece of paper. He, of course, has them on his phone and he's taking them off. And I said, "Oh, hi, is Natalia with you?" Natalia's my daughter. He said, "Oh, no, she's at home." So I said, we had a little chat, and I said, "Well, do you want to grab a coffee later?" He goes, "Oh, no, I've got no time." He said, "I've got to do some price checking, and then I've got to go somewhere else for my frozen foods." And off he went. And I thought, what an amazing reversal, and how fitting that I should have that encounter when we have the reading from Proverbs that Linda so graciously read with a straight face this morning about the value of women in their place. Does any woman here recognize herself in any part of this reading? Okay then. Oh, everyone's like, "God, I'm doing." Does any man here recognize his wife in this description?
Yes.
Oh, they're all saying, "Oh, yes, yes, oh, yes, honey, I recognize you." I think all of us could agree that this piece of scripture is fiction. It wasn't true then, and it isn't true now. If we look at the description, if you look carefully, look down at the scripture and see, this woman never sleeps, first of all. She never sleeps because she has to be up early in the morning. In fact, not even in the morning. Do you see what it says? She rises while it's still night and provides for her household and tasks for her servant girls. She's out looking at real estate, buying it and planting a field while she's there. She's also spinning wool and making cloth. She's parlaying her goods with the local merchants. She's seeking more raw material for her enterprise. She's constantly feeding her household. She's constantly educating her household. She basically never rests. Unlike her husband, who sits at the gates. So a short title for this might be "The Cock Crows, but the Hen Delivers." Because basically, it's the woman who's doing all the work. Not in our house, I guess. Hector's already, the sermon's only just begun. Not in our house. We know this is a work of fiction. This doesn't portray how women of that time were either thought of or treated. It doesn't portray how they enacted both within or without their household. This is a beautiful poem that was written at some point and attached to the end of Proverbs. It doesn't form part of Proverbs proper. It's at the very, very end. It's written in a different way. It's written as an acrostic. In other words, every line begins with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So it's a lovely, lovely poem, but it's not real. So how do we deal then with scripture that isn't real? It's in the book. It's in the Bible. How do we deal with it? How do we, as modern Christians or people of faith, how do we apprehend things in Scripture which seem to be patently untrue? Well, the Anglican way, according to that famous Anglican theologian Richard Hooker, was three. That authority doesn't rest just in Scripture. Does anyone know the famous Anglican three-legged stool? Kurt, do you think you know them all? Scripture.
Time.
That's right, tradition. Scripture, tradition. And the third one is reason. Yes, it's reason. So that when we look at Scripture, we should be looking at it through three lenses. Scripture itself, the authority of Scripture itself, written by people of faith for a faith community. We should look at it through the lens of tradition. What is the generally accepted way of apprehending this thing in the community we express our faith? How has this practice been carried out, usually within our community of faith? And finally, reason. Reason's always a tough one, because your reason may not be the same as mine. But would a reasonable person feel that this is a reasonable thing to believe or to act out? And so we're meant as Anglicans, which is probably why they call us the via media, the great middle way. We're great always at standing back and saying, Scripture is the final authority, tradition is the final authority, and my interpretation is the final authority. It has to be a happy, healthy, intellectual way of looking at Scripture or looking at theology through these three ways and sifting it into something that looks, I guess what we would say is reasonable. Now, many of us don't want to do that. Many people prefer, and we all know them, and you maybe one yourself who prefers to think, I'm just looking at this, every word must be true, and I'm moving by it. But we know if we look at Scripture and take it for word, that Scripture doesn't always stand up. We know that because Scripture unabashedly supports slavery. We know that because Scripture unabashedly supports corporal punishment. It supports the oppression of women. It supports in many Christian pieces in the New Testament a kind of anti-Semitism. So we can't just take the Bible at its word and say that it's right, because it doesn't fit what we know in terms of tradition and reason. So where do we find ourselves then? The suggestion from James in his letter is, well, anything that comes down from heaven is good and perfect. Anything in the secular world is wrong and corrupt. And we know that that's another extreme that isn't really Bible. I think the piece that we have to look at in James that is echoed in the gospel is ask the right questions. When Jesus puts a little child in front of the disciples, he says, unless you come to me like a child, unless you understand me like a child, you're going to miss the point. Now, we can't idealize children in the way that this woman is idealizing. Oh, children are pure, children are wholesome, children are open. The fact is that any one of us who's ever been engaged with children knows all they do is ask questions. Anybody who spent time with children knows, why is the sky blue? Why do you do it like this? Why is that? Why is that? Why is the dog's tail white? Why is the sun come up? Why is it raining? Why can't I go outside? Why can't I have ice cream for dinner? Why? Children ask questions. Jesus is suggesting to his disciples who didn't understand, if you look at the Scripture, but didn't want to ask, that unless they ask questions, they won't understand him, they won't understand his mission, and they'll miss the point. We are encouraged as thinking people not to accept Scripture as it is there on the page. We're meant to look at it through those lenses. We're meant to ask God questions, but as James says, we're meant to ask the right questions. We're not meant to ask questions like, God, why didn't you give me what I prayed for? God, why didn't I win the lottery? God, why didn't I get that job? Why didn't I get that date? Why didn't I get that promotion? Why don't I have more money? Why don't my children come to church? We're meant to ask the right questions. And the right questions are, God, what is it you would have me do? God, what is your will for me now in this situation? God, how am I meant to serve you with those blessings you have given me? We are meant as thinking people of faith to ask the right questions, to listen for the right answers, not to be afraid to question, and not to be afraid to discuss. How many people in this room, you don't have to put your hands up, have even in the last week had a conversation about their faith with someone else? You can. Woo. See, the people who have to put their hands up. Yeah. That is how God in His grace grows in us. That is how we develop as Christians. Not by being right, but by sharing our faith with others who can inform us and help us to know what it is God has called us to. Accepting Scripture as we see it written on the page doesn't grow us as Christians. It stifles us. We need to understand the situation of the community of the writer who wrote it. We need to understand the situation the church at that time was facing. We need to understand how God was acting in His world at that time. But we don't know those things unless we ask the right questions. Some people think it's wrong to question Scripture or wrong to question God. But I think the story in Mark today quite clearly puts us in completely the opposite camp. God gave us an intellect so that we can seek Him intelligently and serve Him appropriately. Not so that we can just sock off ideas and move ahead. I read a wonderful commentary about Proverbs. And I wrote down one line because I thought it was so significant and I wanted to read it to you. The writer said, religion means a well-furnished intellect, employing the best means to accomplish the highest ends. Religion means a well-furnished intellect, employing the best means to accomplish the highest ends. I think that means that when we encounter theology, when we encounter Scripture, we encounter the faith of others, we always look at them through those three important lenses: the authority of Scripture, the authority of tradition, but also the value and authority of our reason. Scripture can be beautiful poetry, it can be beautiful literature. It can contain important brings that grow into great faith. But it should never be read uncritically. It should never be accepted without question. And it should always be seen through the lens of question, supposition, consideration, and most of all, a question to God. God, what does this Scripture mean for me now? And what would you have me do? If we don't